Hello, I am Joe from Answers in Reason, and welcome to another SciPhi Short, where I try and break down aspects of science and philosophy into really short videos around 5 minutes long. So to do that, I need to get a move on. Tonight's topic is on the Null hypothesis and how it relates to atheism and God. It's quite common to hear folks claim that atheism is the null hypothesis. In this SciPhi Short, we will be going over what the null hypothesis is with a few examples. So what is a hypothesis? In science, a hypothesis is an idea that proposes a tentative explanation about a phenomenon or a narrow set of phenomena observed in the natural world. The two primary features of a hypothesis are falsifiability and testability. These are reflected in an if-then statement, summarising the idea and in the ability to be supported or refuted through observation and experimentation. So an example of a hypothesis would be something like, if the COVID vaccine is effective, then we would expect to see, at least in the vaccinated, a reduction of infections, a reduction of hospitalizations, a reduction of serious complications, a reduction of deaths. These could all be part of a single hypothesis, e.g. H1, or considered four separate hypotheses, H1 to H4. So what is the null hypothesis? The null hypothesis, or H0, is a statistical concept with the aim of falsifying scientific information. Falsification is the ability to prove a hypothesis wrong, or theory or model. Therefore, a null hypothesis would essentially be showing that there is no effect from your hypothesis. So an example of the null hypothesis, if we use the previous hypothesis about COVID vaccinations, the null hypothesis would be there is no difference between the vaccinated and unvaccinated for infections, hospitalizations, serious illness, and death. So is atheism the null hypothesis? If you are someone that uses atheism as a lack of belief in gods, then you are literally describing a psychological state. A psychological state is not a hypothesis. If, however, you use atheism as the proposition gods do not exist, then you may be aware that a proposition can form a hypothesis. However, a hypothesis has to be testable and falsifiable. God is unfalsifiable, therefore, this is not a hypothesis. Contextual hypotheses. There are, of course, specific things we could examine, for example, the efficacy of prayer. H1, if prayer is effective, Christians being prayed for in a hospital will heal faster and have a higher recovery rate than non-Christians that are not being paid for. And H0, as in the null hypothesis, would be if prayer is not effective, we would expect to see no significant difference in the healing rate and recovery between Christians who are being prayed for and non-Christians not being prayed for. This doesn't test God, though, just the efficacy of prayer. So in summary, a hypothesis has to be testable and falsifiable. The null hypothesis is essentially the description of what would falsify your hypothesis. God's existence cannot be falsified, so cannot form a hypothesis. Atheism cannot be the null hypothesis. And that's basically it. So that was a really quick and snappy video. I finally got one that I think is going to be under 5 minutes, which is my goal with these. And hopefully you found it somewhat informative and can use it to further your understanding of this little scientific topic and an error that many of us atheists make. There's also other videos that you can check out on it. I'll give you a link to Luke, as in Bearded Heretic, who's done a bit of a longer video on it. That'll pop up right at the end. And we also talk about it in our streams from time to time. Anyway, I'm Joe from Answers in Reason, and this has been the SciPhi Shortz. Have a good night.